Lamar Wiggins, also known as Rae Carruth, defendant. You will sit together, hear the evidence, and render your verdict accordingly. You may be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, let me explain to you briefly the manner in which this matter will proceed. First, the attorneys will have the opportunity to make an opening statement. An opening statement is an outline of what the attorney believes the competent and admissible evidence will be. An opening statement is not evidence and must not be considered by you as evidence. Following opening statements, evidence will be offered, witnesses will be placed under oath and questioned by the lawyers. It is the right of a lawyer to object when evidence is offered which the lawyer believes is not admissible under our rules of evidence. When the court sustains an objection to a question, the jury must disregard the question and the answer if one has been given, and draw no inference from the question or the answer, or speculate as to what the witness would have said if permitted to answer. When the court overrules an objection to any evidence, you must not give such evidence any more weight than if the objection had not been made. If the court grants a motion to strike all or part of an answer of a witness to a question, you must disregard and not consider the portion which has been stricken. During the course of the trial, it may be that questions of law will arise that need to be considered under our rules by the court out of the presence of the jury. If this happens, I may ask you to step to the jury room for a few moments. You should not speculate about what takes place in the courtroom during your absence. We will be considering questions of law that under our rules have to be heard out of the presence of the jury. All of the competent evidence in the case will be presented while you are present in the courtroom. When the evidence is completed, the attorneys will then make their final arguments to you, and these final arguments, again, are not evidence, but are given to assist you in evaluating the evidence. And finally, before you retire to deliberate upon your verdicts, I will give you further instructions on the law that applies to this particular case, and then you will retire to the jury room to deliberate upon your verdicts. Thank you. The state may proceed with this opening statement.
Rae Carruth, or unborn baby, weren't supposed to get any older than 12:30 Tuesday, November 16 last year. They weren't supposed to survive the ambush that the defendant, Rae Carruth, had planned and executed for them. Sharika Adams wasn't supposed to be an eyewitness to what the defendant had done to her and to her son. She wasn't supposed to, but she did. There's a line in Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple. It's by the main character, Celie, played in the movie version by Whoopi Goldberg. She's a young woman, finds herself in a seemingly hopeless situation, living with an abusive man. At a turning point in the book, Celie says, "Poor, I may be ugly and can't cook. A voice say to everything listening, but I'm here. A voice say to everything listening, but I'm here." A year ago exactly last Thursday, Sharika Adams, 24 years old, 8 months pregnant, found herself terrible pain, agonizing pain, shot 4 times, having been led into a murderous ambush by the father of the baby she carried, Rae Carruth. Alone, scared, but she was still here. She was a voice with something to say to everything listening, to everybody listening. Her message Carruth did this. Sure, if he'd pulled the trigger himself, Rae Carruth did this. Shot here in the neck. Shot here, here, 3 times in the side, back. Bullets ripping through her body, tearing organs, bowel, colon, liver, lung, pancreas, spleen, stomach. Yet she was able to hold on. She was able to hold on and use her cell phone, call 911. You will hear that call in the evidence presented in this courtroom. You'll hear her calling 911. And you will hear her tell the 911 operator that she had been with her baby's daddy, Rae Carruth, and that before they left his house, he made a call. She was following him down Rae Road, and he started slowing down in front of her. And then a car pulled up beside her and started shooting. The operator asked her, tell me about this car, describe this car. She said she really didn't see anything in that car. She wasn't able to give the 911 operator any information about the car the shot came from, but she told him that Rae Carruth was in front of her in a Ford Expedition, and she was shot, and he just left. "911 dispatched medic and police, and when they found Sharika, she was in her car just off Rae Road. And they saw in the window of the driver's door of a car in the glass a tight shot pattern, 5 bullet holes. She told him, I'm pregnant. Been shot. And they said, who shot you? A voice saved everything listening. My baby's daddy, Rae Carruth. They knew she was pregnant, knew she'd been shot here, they knew they had to get moving. They rushed her to Carolina's Medical Center. At Carolina's Medical Center, she was being wheeled from the emergency room, the operating room, down the hall to the elevator. Officer Grant, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, walked along beside the gurney, talked to her. To the elevator, waiting on the elevator, riding the elevator up, down the hall to the operating room. He was talking. He said, did your boyfriend shoot? She shook her head. Yes. Nodded yes. And then Sharika Adams told Officer Grant that she and Rae Carruth had been to the movies. After the movies, they went to his house, and then they were going from his house to her apartment. They were going down Rae Road. She was following him. And he started slowing down in front of her. And then she said, couldn't figure out why he stopped in the middle of the road. And then another car, she said, pulled beside her and started shooting. Officer Grant said, can you describe that car for me? She said she couldn't give him any information about that car. And just about that time, they hit the operating room. And Officer Grant had to stop talking with them because they were trying to save a life. The emergency cesarean operation saved the life of her son, Chancellor Adams. More surgery was performed to try to deal with the damage the bullets had done to the inside of Sharika Adams. Later that morning, after the surgery, about 7:30 in the morning, trauma intensive care nurse Tracy Willard was with Sharika. By then, she couldn't talk because a breathing tube had been put into her throat. A tube that ran from the ventilator down her throat to her lungs to breathe for her. She couldn't talk, but she could communicate. She pointed to her own stomach. Nurse Willard said, "Asking about your baby?" Sharika nodded yes. The nurse told her, "Well, I believe it. I think the baby's okay." Nurse Willard asked, Sharika said, "Do you remember what happened to you?" She nodded her head yes. And then she signaled with her hand. She went to write. A voice say to everything listening. And as Nurse Willard held a clipboard for Sharika, she wrote, "And you will see in the evidence in this courtroom her handwritten note." She wrote that she and Rae went to a movie and then back at his house. He then insisted that they go to her place. She said before they left, he made a call from the kitchen. She overheard him say, "We're leaving now." She was driving. He was driving. He was in front of her, she wrote. And he stopped in the road. And a car pulled up the side. She wrote that Rae blocked the front and never came back. As she was writing, some of her family, her father, her brother, her cousin, came in, and Nurse Willard showed them what Sharika had written, and they started asking her questions. And then a police officer came in, and he started asking her questions about what happened. And then Dr. Thomason, the head of trauma intensive care, came in and said it's time for Sharika to rest. And she went to sleep. A sleep from which she would never again awaken. Not in this life. A month later, December 14th, Sharika Adams died. The evidence will show evidence will prove that an unsuspecting Sharika Adams was following the defendant in a dark, narrow stretch of Rae Road. Began to slow down. She had to slow down. And then he stopped in the middle of the road. His Ford Expedition sports utility vehicle blocking the front of her car. And then his accomplices finished closing the trap, pulling close to the side of her car and firing at point-blank range through the glass of the driver window of her car. And then when the shooting stopped, football hero Rae Carruth drove away and left Sharika Adams and his own son for dead. Evidence will prove that Sharika Adams was pregnant. Rae Carruth was the father. That the defendant had other women before and after Sharika became pregnant. That he wanted her to have an abortion. She was adamant in her refusal. She wanted that baby. The evidence will prove that on that Monday, the 15th of November, Rae Carruth had made a date with Sharika Adams to go to a movie, The Bone Collector, at the Regal Cinema, Stonecrest Shopping Center, near Ray Road and 485 Beltway. He didn't pick her up at her apartment over in the South Park area, near South Park Mall. She drove out Ray Road, out across Highway 51, on out Ray Road, out across 485 Beltway, out to his house, out near the Valentine area. They were supposed to go to a 9:45 movie. The evidence will prove that earlier, that same Monday, at 7:44 p.m. that evening, 7:44 p.m., there was a call from Rae Carruth's phone to the cell phone of Michael Kennedy, a friend of Rae Carruth's. And that after that call, Michael Kennedy came to Rae Carruth's house. The evidence will prove that Michael Kennedy drove the car the shots came from. Michael Kennedy arrived with a friend of Kennedy's, a young man named Stanley Abraham. The evidence will show Stanley Abraham was sitting in the front passenger seat of that car when Sharika Adams was ambushed. And while Michael Kennedy and Stanley Abraham were at Rae Carruth's house with Rae Carruth, another man, Van Brett Watkins, came to Rae Carruth's house. The evidence will show Watkins was the shooter. At that time, Watkins was living in the Villager Lodge, a motel on the northwest side of town off of Interstate 85 near the airport. And the evidence will prove that at 12:40 a.m. that Monday, almost exactly 24 hours before Sharika Adams was shot, there was a call from Rae Carruth's cell phone to the Villager Lodge where Watkins lived. The evidence will further prove that during that day, during that Monday, between 9:35 a.m. and 8:12 p.m., there were other calls made from the defendant's phones to the Villager Lodge, where Watkins lived. At Rae Carruth's house that Monday evening, before Sharika got there, his plan to murder Sharika Adams and destroy his unborn son was finalized. Kennedy was the driver, Watkins was to be the shooter, and Carruth to set it up, to lead Sharika into the trap, close the trap for the kill. Just before Sharika arrived to go to the movie, first Watkins and then Kennedy and Abraham left Carruth's house. Watkins then got into the car that Kennedy was driving with Abraham, sitting in the passenger, Nissan Maxim. And they went together and located a guy that Kennedy knew had a gun for sale. And they bought a .38 caliber, 5-shot revolver and a box of bullets. Then they went to the Stonecrest Shopping Center where the Regal Cinema is. Carruth's car was there, inside the theater. They loaded up the gun, and then they threw the rest of the bullets in the box in a storm drain behind the Chick-fil-A fast food restaurant there near the Regal Cinema. Police would later find 31 live 38 special rounds and a Lawman brand 38 bullet box in that same storm drain. And Watkins and Kennedy and Abraham waited for Carruth's signal. At 11:51 p.m., there was a cell phone call from the defendant's cell phone to Michael Kennedy's cell phone. The defendant took Sharika back to his house, and then when he got back there, he insisted that they go to her place. He insisted on that, even though she had driven all the way out to his house. Even though he lived in a big house by himself, she lived in an apartment with a roommate, he insisted that they go back to her place. She was so unprepared for that insistence of his that she had to call home and say, "Straighten up my room, Ray's coming home with me." That call that she made on her cell phone to her apartment was at 12:19 a.m. 12 minutes later, Sharika Adams would call 911 frantically. She can help. At about that same time, the defendant from his home phone called Michael Kennedy's cell phone. He said, we're leaving now. The defendant and Sharika left. He got in his Ford Expedition. She got in her car and began to follow him towards Rae Road. As he was driving along, the defendant made a cell phone call to Atlanta, Georgia, to another woman, phone listed to another woman named Alondia Cheney. Talked with her on his cell phone. That conversation lasted 3 minutes and 45 seconds. When it ended, the defendant immediately called the cell phone of Michael Kennedy. That call was a Star 82 call, which meant it unblocked the caller ID blocking so that one could see who was calling. Immediately after that call, he called Alondia Cheney back and began the conversation with this other woman. Watkins, Kennedy, and Abraham fell in behind Sharika as she followed Rae Carruth down Rae Road from 485 towards Highway 51. 4 minutes after that Star 82 call from Rae Carruth's cell phone to Michael Kennedy's cell phone, 4 minutes after that call, Sharika Adams called 911. I've been shot. Rae Road is 4 lanes from 485 to 51, and it crosses 51 Calvary Church on the left. It then narrows to 2 lanes and narrows more. Sharika followed Rae Carruth down that narrow stretch of Rae Road, and then he slowed, and then he stopped, blocking her. And Kennedy pulled up the Maxim. And Watkins opened fire in the back window, the back seat, passenger side, emptying the 5-shot revolver through the window glass of Sharika's car. The defendant sat there. When the shooting stopped, if you'll hear in Sharika Adams' own words, he just left and he never came back. Kennedy turned the car around, headed back to 51, turned right on 51, went to Elm Lane, turned left on Elm Lane, out Elm Lane to Ray Road and 485 where Watkins' truck was. The murder weapon would later be found beside a fence near Ray Road, not far from the intersection of 51, with 5 spent shell casings in it. When medic and police found Sharika, she was in a yard in the first house on the first street off of Ray Road in a little community just top of the hill. She had told 911 that she'd been on Ray Road, she'd passed Calvary Church on the left. She told them that she was in the Wessex Square community. She told them that she was on McAndrew Drive. She even spelled Wessex and McAndrew for them on the 911 call. She told 911 operator that she didn't see anything of the car the shots came from, but she was able to describe her car, make and color, black BMW. She was able to tell them that Rae Carruth was driving a white Expedition. He even gave him a partial tag number for his car. She told him she was cold, she was bleeding, she was shot in the neck and the back. She told the 911 operator what Rae Carruth had done to her baby. She told medic, she told Officer Grant, she told Nurse Willard through the evidence. She's going to tell you Rae Carruth did this. On Thanksgiving Day, the defendant was arrested for the attempted murder of Sharika Adams. She hadn't died yet. Made bond and got out of jail. On December 14th, Sharika died. A warrant was issued for Rae Carruth for her murder. We're unable to locate him. Then on the 15th of December, the FBI found Rae Carruth hiding in the trunk of a Toyota in a motel parking lot, Wildersville, Tennessee. The evidence will prove that Rae Carruth planned the murder of Sharika Adams and the destruction of his own son. And he personally participated in the execution of that plan to make sure it was carried out. Sharika Adams was not supposed to live past 12:30, time of the attack. Not supposed to be an eyewitness to what Rae Carruth had done to her, to that baby. But when Rae Carruth drove away and left her for dead, she was still here. Her voice say to everything listening, to everyone listening. The evidence will prove that Rae Carruth is guilty of conspiracy to murder Sharika. Is guilty attempt to destroy an unborn child, his own flesh and blood. Guilty of shooting into the vehicle Sharika occupied. And guilty of murder, premeditation, malice, deliberation. Sharika Adams, murder in the first degree. After you've heard the evidence, the state will